Hello, I'm Christa with the Aztec, Highland Games and Celtic Festival, helping to celebrate our 10th annual event. Unfortunately, we had to be virtual this year since we had to cancel the in-person event due to the current pandemic, but we wanted to celebrate our 10th year in style, so here we are. One of the reasons why people love to come to our event when it is able to be held in person down at Riverside Park is the opportunity to eat some British and Celtic food. So beyond having the other cultural aspects of the heavy Celtic athletics and the dance and the music and talking to the clans, we also get to experience some of the culinary joys coming out of British and Celtic cultures. So I'm going to be showing you how to make a British food that is near and dear to my heart, and that is the Cornish pasty. So, if you noticed in my introduction, my last name is Chapman, which is not a Scottish name or a Celtic, what you would traditionally think of as a Celtic name. It's an English name. However, Cornwall, where the Cornish pasties come from, is one of the Celtic nations, as Cornish is a Gaelic language. So we are not cheating by sharing this at the Celtic Festival. This is a true food that fits into our event. So again, my great-grandparents came over here to the United States from Cornwall. The family was they were miners or in the mining trade, and moved to Globe, Arizona, or mostly settled in Globe, Arizona, where they continued to be miners for the most part in the copper mines. And so not only did they bring the mining tradition, but they also brought Cornish pasties with them. So pasties were the perfect mining food. If you don't know what they are like the world's first Hot Pocket. So they're a meat and vegetable inside baked or encapsulated into basically a pie crust. So they're perfect little grab-and-go lunches that you can take with you down into the mines. So again, my family, we grew up making these. It was sort of a rite of passage as a Chapman in my household to get in the kitchen and get your hands dirty making some pasties. So I'm the oldest grandchild, and I certainly have memories of me and all of my cousins in the kitchen with the aunts and uncles and grandma in there being covered in flour, learning how to make pasties. Now, not all of us have carried on the tradition. I'm one of the grandkids. My cousin Will, he also continues to make pasties. But we do try and teach it to the younger ones. So for example, my little nephew Eli, who's now 10 years old, every time I go to visit, we make sure that we make a batch of pasties so that he can have that remembrance as well. So yeah, my great-grandmother would have made them on a very regular basis, again, because it was a staple. So when my grandparents got married, though my grandpa wasn't a miner, pasties were one of his favorite foods. So my grandma asked my great-grandmother if she could share the recipe so that she could ensure my grandpa would continue to be able to eat them. My great-grandmother said, I don't have a recipe. I've just been making them my whole lives. I just put a pinch of this and a handful of that, and that's how I do it. So my grandma sat down in the kitchen with my great-grandmother, and they basically tried to figure out a recipe. So Mame would take a scoop of something, and my grandma would try and measure it and figure out what those proportions were. So the written recipe that my family has passed down is very informal. So again, this is our version. We use just meat, potatoes, and onion inside the pastry. According to official Cornish pasty rules, another common ingredient is swedes or turnips. My family didn't tend to like those, so they didn't continue that tradition on. I guess Mame, my great-grandmother, would put them in occasionally, but people didn't really like them, so they stopped and just started using the potatoes for the most part. Sometimes when you visit places, Cornish pasties will have all kinds of things in them, like peas and carrots, but again, according to official Cornish pasty rules, the only allowable ingredients are potatoes, onions, steak, and occasionally swedes. They do acknowledge that many people put carrots in them, but they are highly discouraged. And I know I visited a Renaissance fair as a kid and had a Cornish pasty from a vendor and bit into it, and it had peas and carrots and all kinds of things, and I was quite disgusted by them ruining my family tradition. So again, there's different variations, but this is the Chapman version. So they're a little bit involved, as you can see with all of this. So again, by the time I was around, none of our family was minors. We weren't eating this on a regular basis. It was more of a special treat when we would all get together. My grandma would make a big batch and we would all share them. And I do the same a couple times a year for special occasions. We'll make them. So the ingredients are very simple, but again, the process is a little bit in depth. And it's definitely messy. So speaking of that, I am going to right away put on my apron because I do not want to have to get my kilt cleaned again after having just picked it up. So I'm going to put this on because by the end of it, I'm going to be covered in flour, but that's part of the fun. So let's go through what we need to start these pasties. So we will need, ingredients-wise, we will need flour, 4 cups of all-purpose flour. You also need shortening or some kind of fat. So we use vegetable shortening in my family. Previously, they used lard. One of my aunts now is trying to be a bit more health conscious. I've been told is using olive oil as her fat. I'm going to stick with the vegetable shortening, which I know. So again, you can buy it in these bricks, or we used to have the big tub. You can take a scoop out of that. So you need a cup of that, 4 cups of flour, a cup of water, and a teaspoon of salt for the pastry. And then we will also need salt for when we season the inside. The filling, very simple as well. You need 3 russet potatoes. They're supposed to be medium potatoes. I think as time is progressing, all the vegetables and portions seem to be getting larger. So this is what I would call probably an old medium potato. I was not able to find 3 this size, only 1. So my other 2 potatoes are a bit larger. So don't know that I will necessarily use all of the potato. I'll just kind of have to look at it and see if the proportions look good to me. So 3 russet potatoes. You also need an onion, again, medium to smallish size, and you need steak. So back when I was a kid, you would just buy a round steak. So it was in a package, larger package, it was square. It was this very flat, round cut of meat. Those are almost impossible to find. I never see them processed that way anymore. So I have come to use top round steak. This is a London broil. So these are thicker. Those old round steaks used to be about a ½ inch thick, was perfect. These are more like 1 inch thick, and the sizes are bigger. So I was trying to ask my grandma how big we thought those old round steaks were. We were guessing maybe 1 pound to 1.5 pounds. This is almost 2 pounds of London broil. So once I cut it down to the right width, I don't think I'll end up using all this, maybe about 3/4 of it, which is fine because the leftovers is great. You can use it for stew, you can marinate it for steak, whatever you would like. So anyways, a good cheap piece of meat. We don't want to use super good meat in this. You just use a nice London broil. These are also good because they're fairly lean, because we're going to trim all of this fat off when we go to prepare it. Okay, you will also need a couple baking sheets, ungreased, just plain baking sheets. You'll need some cutting board and some really sharp knives, or a food processor. You can certainly cut all the veg by hand, but now that I have a food processor, it is much easier to get all those potatoes and onions uniform size, obviously with the food processor, and it's much quicker. So if you're going to use a food processor, you'll need a regular just blade for slicing the onions, and then we're going to want like a deli slicer to cut the little pieces of our potatoes. Let's see, what else? Oh, you need 2 large bowls, or at least 1 very large bowl that you wash in between, and you're also going to need a dishcloth. So this is an old-fashioned style, old sackflower style dishcloth, so you need something like this, not terry cloth, or a piece of cheesecloth that we're going to put over the dough while it's resting. And then finally we need a rolling pin and some place to roll out the pastries. So, oh, and I have some butter here. You only need about a pat or two's worth of butter. I have most of a stick here, but we won't use nearly all of that. That will finish inside inside when we go to wrap them up. Okay, so those are our ingredients and our needs, and I will be right back after I clean off my station. Okay, so the first step in making pasties is going to be to make the dough. So we're going to make this, and then we're going to let it sit and rest while we prepare the filling part. So I have one of my large bowls, my more medium-sized bowl. I have pre-measured out here 4 cups of flour. So I'm just going to dump that in, and then I have my cup of shortening here. So again, these cubes are very nice that they have now, because you don't have to dirty up a measuring cup trying to scoop it out of the big container. So this is completely the way I go now. So get our shortening and our flour in there, and then I use a fork to basically cut the shortening into the flour. So if you've made pie crusts by hand, that's exactly the same process. So again, traditionally these would have been made with lard, so it would have been a suet crust. I've actually never tried it with lard, just because lard's a little hard to find anymore, but I'm sure it's extra delicious. So it's something that I would love to try and do at some point. So again, I'm just cutting the shortening into the bread, or to the flour here. And so I'll continue to do this till it starts to get that really nice granule, sort of like pea-sized little clumps that it starts to make when you get a nice pie crust. Oops. See, I told you this is messy business. I'm going to be covered sooner versus later. So, okay. But I really think that that's starting to look good. It's becoming this very nice, you can sort of feel the consistency. It's starting to be like that play sand stuff that they have. So, and before I forget, I'm also going to put my teaspoon of salt into this crust. So I'll do that before I add the water. Give it a nice big stir. Make sure we get that mixed in. Okay, and I suppose you could do this next part with a spoon, though I rarely do. So we're just going to pour our cup of water in here and start mixing it. But again, this is messy business, and you end up using your hands through most of it, so don't be afraid to get in there and get a little messy. So I don't want to overmix this flour and water crust. I just want to start making sure, and see, I got to use my hands. I just can't seem to get it mixed properly without it. So you don't want to overmix it because it'll start to get too tough and dry. But we do want to get that water in there so that it's really through all the flour and sticking together nicely. Now, again, I live in New Mexico now, and we're at 5,600 feet where I am. It's also the high desert. So when I grew up, we were in Southern California. If you've done much cooking or baking, you know how the altitude and also the humidity in the air really affects dough and crust. So I will say I still struggle a bit to get the right consistency at the higher altitudes. In this case, it's feeling a little dry to me, so I am going to add some water before I get it fully mixed. So I have about another 1/4 cup here. I don't think I'm going to use all that. We're going to try maybe 1/8 of a cup, a couple tablespoons more to see. So again, you don't want to knead this too hard like you do with a rising dough because it'll get like kind of tough and crazy. But we do want to make sure that it's sticking together well. And again, this is seeming a little flaky and dry. Put another tablespoon in there. My grandma, like she said too, she's moved around the United States or throughout California and had to adjust to the different altitudes. You know, at first, sometimes with baking, trying to add the water later, it can be very, it won't work. But this dough is pretty forgiving in that sense. So if you feel like it's really too dry, you can always add a bit more water and sort of squish it in there, and it usually works pretty well. So we want this to be about like Play-Doh consistency. So we want it to stick together in a ball, but as you can see, it's not gooey or runny at all. So this is looking pretty dang good. So I'm going to take this and sort of shape it into a loaf-like shape. So we're going to be breaking this into 8 servings. So again, these pasties are our family recipe, the size and shape that we make them. They make 8. So I try and make myself a nice rectangular little loaf here, because then when we go to break it into the 8 pieces, it's really easy to divide it evenly. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So that is basically our pasty crust. Now, what I will do is I'm going to set this aside, and I'm going to take this dishcloth that we had, and I'm going to cover the dough with it while it rests and we make the center. So again, this helps keep it dry from drying out too terribly bad. If you are really dry, you could probably dampen that a tiny bit and leave it on there. Okay, so I'm going to clean up with the crust mess that I made, wash my hands, and I'll be back to make the center. Okay, so now I have my dough is resting there under my dishcloth, and I have prepped to start making the filling. So first we'll go with the onion. I don't know why, but I always do this part first. So I'm just going to go right to the food processor. Obviously you can cut this by hand if you would like, but I hate it, so I am not going to do that, because even prepping this onion, my eyes are stinging. So again, this onion was a bit on the larger size. You can certainly adjust these to your personal preference. My mother hates onion, so she puts about half of what I like to put in them, but this seems like a good amount for me today. So we're going to start off with our regular chopping blade and just throw our chunks of onion in there. Now, hopefully this won't be too terribly loud. My husband is the sound guy for the Aztec, Highland Games and Celtic Festival, so I'm really hoping he can make sure that this doesn't blast everybody out when we go to edit the video. So here we go. Actually, I think we're going to pulse, not just turn it on, because we want it to be, goodness, my eyes. It's going to be a good spicy onion. Good. Okay. Sorry, I'm crying. That's probably good. So we just want this nice, really nice and small and even. That's kind of the key to making these pasties. Everything, because we're going to cook it raw. It's not pre-cooked before it goes into the oven. So we want everything to be really uniform so that it cooks well and mixes well and blends well. So I'm going to pull out a couple of these pieces that my chopping did not. Oh my gosh, my eyes, this is so bad. I could never do a real cooking show. Anyways, but as you can see, nice little fine pieces, like if you were making salsa or something of that ilk. So I'm just going to finish sort of hand dicing these to make them a little bit more uniform to match our other pieces. Whew. I know y'all probably can't see my eyes, but this is crazy. All right. Speaking of which, I do need at this point in time to preheat my oven. So we start off at 400 degrees and we're going to cook it there for a while, and then we'll just turn it down to 350. We'll talk more about that once we get to the baking, but I'm going to preheat it to 400 degrees starting right now. Okay, I'm also going to grab my really large bowl for my filling, and I'm going to dump these stinky onions in there. And this is just a regular yellow or white onion. Okay, in my bowl it went. So again, our potatoes, you can hand cut these I'm going to use the food processor, but I'll start off showing how to hand cut them in case this is the way that you choose to do that. So again, part of the game is making them even. So I'm going to quarter these potatoes, my nice medium potato here, so that I have big fat wedges. So I'm just going to quarter that, and then I'm going to cut them very thin, like less than 1/8 of an inch thin, and get these little potato chips, if you can see that, little potato chips. And this is why I hate to do it by hand, because I start to get lazy and they don't always come out so even. Or if you have little ones, it's just easier to use the food processor, right? So again, I have these little tiny potato chips that will be very nice. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish this one up, and then we'll use the food processor. So for this, I'm going to use, again, that deli slicer blade so that I can get those nice chips. So this has a little chute there. I'm trying to do this backwards, so bear with me. All right, in the meantime, I'm going to cut these again into my wedges so that they'll be ready to be processed. So this is a lot of how I learned cooking skills as a kid. You know, how to use a knife, how to use a potato peeler. I do remember peeling the tip of my fingertips a couple times. But you know, that's all part of the process of learning. So yeah, I got a lot of my kitchen skills from being in the kitchen with my grandma, learning how to do this stuff. So it's a gift that kept on giving. Okay, I think I have my food processor hooked up properly. Nope, I don't. So now that you're going to miss me tearing that entirely apart and putting it back together because I don't know what I'm doing, we have this right. I'm trying to use it backwards, so I'm a little confused here. Okay, it's working. We're good to go. So now we're going to slice these potatoes up. Now we have tons of tiny, beautiful little potato chips to add into our bowl. So again, I was saying I thought these potatoes were a bit large, but my onion's a bit large and so is my meat. So I actually think I'm just going to throw all of them in there. We'll just have extra fat pasties. It's better to have fat pasties than have skimpy pasties. So, all of that in there. Okay, I'm going to clean up this mess and we'll be right back to cut the steak. Okay, so here we have our London broil. So I have a very, very sharp knife. This is going to make our lives much easier when we go to do this. So we're going to trim this steak so that we get all of this extra fat off, because there's nothing worse than biting into your pasty and getting one of those like gristly fat chunks where it won't let go and you yank on it with your teeth and half of the thing comes out. We don't want that to happen. So we're going to cut all of this, pretty much all of this fat off so that we can't have any secret surprises when we bite into our pasty. And again, this top round steak has very little marbling in it. People like my husband would say, therefore, it's no good because the fat is where all the flavor is, but I promise you these are gonna be delicious. So we don't need those expensive, nice marbled ribeyes or anything for this. Okay, and then again, see I've got some connective tissue in there. I'm just gonna cut all of that out, because I don't want that to end up in somebody's mouth unexpectedly. So when we go to slice this steak, we're going to want to try and make it about the same size as our potato chips. So again, I'm gonna toss this part. If you have a dog, feed it to them. If not, it goes in the trash. Okay. So again, our potato chips are about, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch thick, maybe 1/2 to 3/4 inch square-ish size. So we used to, again, use those round steaks that were only about 1/2 inch thick. And so sometimes if I have a very thick piece, I will have to try and cut that in half, fillet it in half. But I am not going to do that for this one. I think it's within an acceptable thickness range. It's about 3/4 of an inch. So I'm just going to make sure I cut them very thin. So I'm going to cut, I usually cut against the grain on this, just nice little strips, like I'm making fajita strips or something like that. So generally I slice them all one direction, and I just make, and again, so you can see sort of, these are about 1/8 to 1/4, maybe 1/4 of an inch thick, little like fajita strips, your stir fry strips. Okay, now that I have them all sliced this direction, again, I have these big ribbons of steak. Perhaps you can see that. Hopefully I don't drop that on the ground, but big ribbons of steak. I'm just going to turn my cutting board and I'm going to slice them again this direction and make them again about 1/2 inch so that I end up with chips of beef. So there, I've done another one of my strips, and I didn't do a super good job cutting that direction. So now we have beef chips to match our potato chips. Okay, so slice this away. Okay, so now I have my plate full of little beef chips. I didn't do a super good job that one direction of getting these apart, but as I toss them into my big bowl, I'll sort of pull them apart and make sure that they all separate. So again, I feel like I maybe have a bit too much meat, but I'll just kind of eyeball it. Unfortunately, if you're new to this, eyeballing it is hard, but I will say proportion-wise, you probably want about 2/3 vegetables to maybe a third meat, and you could probably even go lighter on the meat if you wanted. Yeah, 2/3 vegetables to about 1/3 meat is a good ratio. My cheap knives did not slice these very well, but again, we need to make sure we pull all these apart because we want them to mix in there evenly and then again to cook evenly. Wow, I did a pretty terrible job of slicing this. Don't do like I did. Cut them all the way down the first time. That's why this sharp knife is really super important. And I think I may have a piece of gristle that was going through here, which again is a good reason why to cut it against the grain, because then we're breaking up that tendon. I may just get rid of that piece. It's totally gristly. It's feeling really gross. So, ooh, these are coming a nice apart nicely, so I did better on this side. But again, if you have that really sharp knife, you're making sure you're cutting down all the way the first time, unlike me. Okay, so I have gotten all of my filling ingredients in there. So now I'm going to want to start mixing these up. And again, I just use my hands. It's the best way to ensure that we're getting it all mixed up. And another good check on our meat here as we go through. So I'm saying our proportions look pretty good. Actually, if anything, we might have even been able to go a little heavier on the meat. But yeah, it's looking pretty good and marbly here. So, get those 2 pieces taken care of. All right, so to hold this up, hopefully you can see that, but a nice mixture all in there of our lovely filling. This is the part I struggle with, and today, hopefully together, we will be figuring this out more precisely. My grandma does not have exact measurements for the seasoning of the filling, and it's literally just salt and pepper. So she just added those to, to taste, basically. And so she always told me, of course, we were in Southern California, I grew up in San Diego, so I was familiar with the beach, to make it nice and briny so that it smelled like the beach. I don't have a great palate or a great nose, so I sort of struggle with this. I also tend to not like a lot of salt in my food personally, so I notoriously undersalt these pasties. And because they're so simple, getting enough salt in there is crucial. They're gonna taste, they just taste so bland if you don't get enough salt and pepper, particularly salt in there. So I'm gonna kind of measure as we go, and hopefully I will get the right amount, and then I can write that down and I'll add it to the recipe. Speaking of the recipe, so what I'll do is I will add the downloadable printable link to that in the comments section of this video, so you can print that and keep it and try it on your own. Okay, we're going to start with a teaspoon here, so I'm just going to go a teaspoon at a time. Almost guaranteeing I'm going to need more than that. Actually, I'm going to go right for 2 teaspoons just from looking at it. So potatoes, if you don't know, just soak up salt, because they're pretty bland. So they just soak up salt like crazy. So when I cook these with my nephew, he really likes salt. He's a salt eater and he's got a good palate. He's also younger, so he doesn't burn out all of his taste buds on bad habits. So when he helps me, I'll lift some up and I'll say, what do you smell? Do you smell the salt? Does it smell like the ocean? And he'll say, I think it still smells a little like potatoes or a little like onions, and then we'll keep adding it till he gives me the thumbs up. But unfortunately, Eli's not here with me today to help, so we're gonna have to go on my nose. So let me smell it. And it doesn't really smell salty, it smells more meaty. So we're gonna keep going. So that was 2 teaspoons. I'm gonna go for a 1/3 here. And again, I think we'll probably, once I think it's good, we're probably gonna add an extra for good measure, because I tend to always undersalt the dang things. Okay, it is starting to smell better. Before I get too ahead of myself, I'm gonna add pepper. So you can do fresh ground pepper. I often will do that, but for time's sake, I'm just gonna use pre-ground pepper because you do take quite a bit. This, I usually do more by sight. We wanna have little pepper flakes on all the chunks. We don't want them to be black with pepper. But yeah, you want to be able to look at it and definitely identify that there is pepper in the mixture. So I think I'm going to go a little bit more. So if I have to guess, we're probably at least a ½ teaspoon of pepper, if not more. Now, English people, British people are notorious for eating terribly bland food. So ½ teaspoon of pepper may seem like nothing, but we don't want to get it too spicy. Sort of another funny thing, now that I live in New Mexico, I will make these for people occasionally. And they will say, what would be really good in these? Green chili. Absolutely. So I do occasionally put green chili in there. I got the approval from Grandma. She said, no, I think that's fair. It's a regional addition. So by all means, try some green chili in there, and it really is delicious. So this is a fun base recipe that if you're a foodie or a chef, unlike I am, feel free to experiment with. I don't know if you can call them Cornish pasties, but you can still make something really delicious. So I put 4 big shakes of pepper in here. I didn't measure it, sorry. I'm gonna think about that. I'm going to say between a ½ teaspoon and a teaspoon, depending on your flavor profile on that. We're up to 4 teaspoons on the pepper or the salt. And I'm definitely not smelling the salt. Of course, as you could tell from the earlier part, I about burnt my nose out with that onion, making it run, and my eyes water like crazy. Okay, I can definitely smell the salt now, so I think I may just add another half a teaspoon just to, for good measure. Yeah, smells nice and oceany, nice and briny. Okay, so that's our innards. Again, that's what we're looking like. So we're just gonna set this aside, and then we're gonna set up to make the pastry. We're gonna stuff them. We're gonna stuff these bad boys. Okay, so now I'm set up to do my pasty assembly station. So I have my dough, I have my filling, I have an ungreased baking sheet. Usually you can fit about 6 on one, and there's a couple extras, so I have a smaller one here. I'll do the 2 demo ones on here. I have my rolling pin, I have some butter and a paring knife, and I have some water. So first what we're gonna do is look at our dough here that's been resting. So I'm gonna pull it over here. Again, I made it into this brick shape. It's fairly even. And what I'm gonna do is grab, let's see, a knife here, big old knife, and I'm basically gonna cut this to divide it into 8 pieces. So I usually cut it down the middle here for 2, cut that then in half for 4, and then each of those halves into halves. And the ends are a little skimpier, so yeah, I'm trying to get that as even as possible. Okay, so now I have 8 little cubes of dough. So when I'm not using this, I want to leave it over here covered with my cloth so it's not continuing to dry out as we're cooking. So I'm gonna roll this into a round piece like a tortilla or a pie crust. So again, we're here in the high desert. Things tend to be too dry versus too sticky, but I also have a little cup of extra flour here. So I'm just gonna flour my surface slightly so this doesn't stick, but don't get too crazy because you don't want to dry out your dough. And I'm going to take my little square and I'm going to start to round this into a little round disc here. So again, this is kind of a last ditch way to knead some of that moisture around and get it nice and even. Now this is maybe on the drier side. It's not sticky at all, which is okay, but it's still malleable, so it's not just cracking like crazy. But I'm going to want to be really careful and not add too much flour as we're rolling this out, because I have a feeling it may get to where it could dry out really quickly. So again, if you're in a sticky spot, you may need to flour this more, but we just need a little flour on our rolling pin. So we're going to try and roll this into a round disc. And it should end up being roughly dinner plate sized. Now some people are better at getting these round. I am not always, but round-ish is good. So again, maybe like small dinner plate size, we want these guys to be. I would say the dough is going to be about an 1/8 of an inch to 1/16 of an inch thick. So pretty much like a pie crust. Okay, I have made rounder pasties crust before, but I would say generally this looks doable. Okay. So we have here our round-ish round. Now my mom can be a little obsessive compulsive sometimes. She actually takes a plate and cuts the edges to make it perfectly round. I don't think that's necessary. You know, these are artistic pieces, if nothing else. So we can definitely go with this shape. It's round enough. So now that I have my round and I've ensured that it's not stuck to my table, I gave it one last good flip. I'm also going to divide my filling roughly into 8 pieces. So this is harder for me, but I just kind of score it out with my hand like a pie. So we got 4, 6. See, that doesn't work like a pie. Yeah, it does. 6, 8. Okay, duh. Math, obviously, is not my strong suit today. Okay, so I've scored out my little pieces or chunks of filling in there. I will say, based on my hands, it's about a good, nice, full handful. So I'm going to drop that football-shaped-ish right there in the center of my dough. And then I'm going to take some water. I'm going to dip my 2 fingers into the water. And I'm going to wet half of the pasty on the outside. So an arc just around the top half of the pasty, just to make that dough a little bit stickier so that when I fold it, it will stick. But before I fold it, I'm also going to add a little chip of butter right there on top. Okay, so I have all my filling in there. So now I'm going to grab this guy and I'm going to pinch this closed. So again, we're making kind of like a taco or a calzone shape. So my filling is kind of football shaped this direction. And I'm pinching this dough nice and closed like this. So we've got this nice little half circle. Okay, so half the battle, we're halfway there, and this is good. Our dough didn't just fall apart. If it's too dry, this process is crazy. You'll just try and pick it up and holes will be forming all over the place. And I will say at that point, stop, probably toss that piece and add more water to your dough as you go forward because you don't want it to just fill with holes because then all the juice in your filling is gonna run all over and you're gonna lose a lot of that flavor. Plus they'll be so stuck to your sheet, you can never get them up. So again, I got my filling in here in a nice little half moon shape and I have this edge around here. So now there's a specific technique that we were taught. And again, I've seen variations over the years, but I think this is pretty traditional and consistent. And it's this pinch and roll movement. So we're gonna make a beautiful sort of braided, twisted pattern on this seam right here. So we're gonna pinch this and by all means, I wish my grandma could be here because hers are beautiful. Mine are functional. So I'm pinching this and then I'm rolling the dough and then I'm gonna change the camera angle here in a second so that we can really see how to do this. But I'm pinching with my left hand and I'm rolling like this. Pinching and rolling. Now my grandma was left-handed, so she had to teach all of us how to do things backwards, but she was very adept at both figuring out and teaching us how to do things if we were not left-handed, which only my brother is, I think, out of all the grandkids, is also left-handed. Okay, so I have pinched and rolled, and now I have this lovely little pastry with this beautiful braided edge, and actually, I did a pretty dang good job, if I may say so myself. So we now take our paring knife again, and we're gonna make a little slit sort of right over where we put that butter pad to let the air out. And of course, the fun thing is you can put your initials in there so everybody can tell which pasty is theirs, and they can either share it with somebody or be forced to eat it, depending on how ugly it is, I guess. But I guess the miners actually, they would mark them with initials so that everybody knew which one was their pasty to take. I don't know if they had custom orders or not, but that's the case. And then we kind of curve it into this nice little half moon sort of, or this crescent shape. And we drop it on our ungreased baking dish, just like that. So I'm gonna switch my camera angle so hopefully we'll be able to see what my hands are doing more as we make the next 7. Okay, so hopefully you'll be able to see better what I am doing now with my actual hands. So again, I got a little schmutz on here from my last pasty, so I just want to make sure I clean that up. We're going to dust this very, very slightly with flour because it's very dry today here. Okay, I'm going to take my little square and I'm going to start to work that into a circular shape. So it's kind of a little concave bowl there that we start to make. Flop that down, make sure I have a bit of flour on my rolling pin. And I'm just gonna start pushing from the outside, or the inside out. Oops, and that's exactly what you don't want it to do. You don't want it to stick and roll on itself. Okay, flip it that way. And just start to work this bad boy out. Now, it is easier to get them rounder the more even your little flying saucer shape is to start with. If you can get the edges on that real even, it makes it much easier to make a circle. And again, I'm sure there's plenty of you out there who's far more adept at rolling circles than I am, so don't laugh at me too hard as I struggle to do this. Again, we're getting pretty good there. It's getting about dinner plate size. We have a little more over here I can push out. All right, and as you can see, that bad boy is not exactly round, but it's certainly round enough for us to work with. Okay, so now I'm going to take my about of an eighth, or it should be an eighth of this filling. So again, for me, I have pretty big man hands, but you know, a good, I'd say probably about 1.5 cups of filling. Yeah. Maybe a little less if you have not such big potatoes and onion and meat like I did. So again, I take my 2 fingers in the water. I'm going to just lightly make a half circle around there so that I can get, ooh, and I always forget this part. Don't forget, you want to put that pat of butter right there on the top for extra goodness. Okay, now that I've got all my filling, I'm going to close this up. And again, this tuck and roll braid sort of hides some of our imperfections. So we have our nice little half moon there, our little closed up taco. And I'm going to pinch and roll. So again, I'm right-handed, so I sort of pinch with my left hand, roll with my right. So what I'm pinching, turn it this way, is I'm pinching that excess I just rolled over sort of together for the next side and then rolling. I have to do it this direction though, or I can't, it won't be as beautiful. Oh, this one's not very beautiful anyways. But really the moral of the story is we get that sealed up. We want it completely sealed up so that none of our juice and filling is gonna fall out. So this braid is a little flatter. It doesn't have quite the roll and dynamic that I would like to see, but this one will work. And again, I'm gonna put my slit right there in the top and my air hole and kind of push it into this crescent form and drop it on my pan. And we'll just continue to do that for the next 6 more that we have. Okay, so my battery died in there. This is like the blooper reel of making a cooking video. But anyways, we got them all made up here while our battery was charging a bit. So here is our finished product. So we've got 5 on this, 3 on there for a total of 8. When you put them on your tray, you don't have to worry too much about spacing them out. It's not like they're going to grow or anything. You don't really want them to like glue together. But like this one, you know the edge is getting pretty close to touching. That's perfectly fine. So yeah, so right now, again, we preheated our oven to 400 degrees, so it's ready to go. And what we're going to do is we're going to stick those in there like this for 15 minutes at 400 degrees. Then after 15 minutes, we're just going to turn the temperature on the oven down to 350 without opening the oven, not doing anything like that, just turning the temperature down to 350 and letting it cook for an additional 30 minutes. So we're looking at 45 minutes cook time. So I'm going to throw these in the oven and then I'm going to clean up this atrocious mess in my kitchen so we can get ready to taste them when they come out of the oven. Okay, so making our pasties is complete. They are hot out of the oven. The beautiful tray of them here. And I'm being joined by Brian Paul, my lovely husband, and also sound man at our Aztec Highland Games and Celtic Festival, so you may recognize him. So yeah, we're gonna taste these bad boys.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Do they smell good?
They smell great. They smell wonderful. Good job.
So yeah, these are definitely hand food. You can eat them with a fork. My grandpa always liked to eat them with ketchup. I actually think they're delicious enough to, you don't have to lie, are they actually good? We got the salt right. Good show. So yeah, again, my grandpa ate them with ketchup. He ate everything with ketchup. Generally, if you season them well enough, you don't need to put condiments, but these keep really well. So you can throw them in the refrigerator, eat them cold. We often eat leftovers cold, or you can reheat them in the microwave or the toaster oven. So very delicious. So a couple quick plugs for some of our other, I don't know what we call them, partners? Partners, not really sponsors, but partners. So I have here a bottle of Wines the San Juan wine. So they have served, because you can't have a Celtic festival without alcohol, right? So Wines the San Juan is a local winery here out in our county. They're in Blanco, New Mexico. And they have been with us since the first year, serving wine and now beer at our events. So yeah, went and bought a beautiful bottle of their Blue Winged Olive. This is a great fruity wine. This is a pretty simple meal, so this is a perfect complement. So yeah, I want to plug them. If you want to find out more about their products, you can go to winesofthesanjuan.com. Pretty easy. So, and the other thing, this beautiful pottery that we have our stuff in is made by Jessica Pilati with Pilatery, and she ran our games for what, 7-8 years is the chair. So yeah, so if you're in Aztec, visit Feet of Clay and make sure you grab up some of this beautiful pottery that Jessica makes. So I think with that, we're going to enjoy the rest of our dinner.